what we're finding with like the vertical mock scrape that I use is they're hitting that 365.
Yep.
But when they travel through, it establishes that pattern. So we put scrapes where we need them, and I'll actually cut down scrapes around that are perennial because I want them hitting that scrape in front of my stand. I don't want them hitting the one 60 yards away. This is I can't see the date because my eyes are so old, but this is Venti. That's a 3-year-old 21 point, and he's the one that we're after this year. But you can see the scrape off to the side of him. He's coming in to hit that. And I don't know if it's got to be late because he's almost full grown, like late August or something. But those bucks tell us they're going to be there. We have a tree stand right there in that location. We're setting up a couple more just specifically for Venti because I really want to kill him this year. He's a 3.5. He was 3.5 last year, be 4.5 this year, and I don't know. He could be 180 to 200 inches plus, and I'm just not going to pass him up as a 4-year-old. And other ones I might pass up as a 4-year-old. So I'm not a saint. I'll shoot. I'll pass up a 4-year-old where it has more potential for a 5 or 6. I'll let him get a little bit older. So I'm not going to say I'm holding out for all.
I think. Do we lose him? He freeze.
Oh, you guys are now?
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah.
I think the main questions, Jeff, is it who gets first crack, you or Diane?
You know what? At this point, it's kind of like people ask it all the time. And so 2 years ago, she shot our number 1 target buck. He was a split brow buck. He's 160 inch plus 6-year-old. And I really wanted to shoot him. In fact, I had a close encounter with him, and it was, oh boy, I didn't get him. Let's just put it that way. Didn't get a shot and just kind of messed up a little bit. But Diane ended up shooting him. And that was the best thing that ever happened because she is so excited about deer hunting. I mean, that was awesome. On her screensaver. She went from, hunting's maybe not my thing, but I go out 50 times, and then all of a sudden she's, shooting the best buck in the area, and it's on her screensaver, and it made her a hunter for life, I think. And so if she shot Venti, I'd be happy because we're all working on it together. If my son Dante shot it, or one of the boys, Jake or Sam, if they were out hunting and shot it, that'd be awesome. Someone in our party. So,
what are you looking for, I guess, in that early, as you start to approach hunting season? Obviously, there's a ton of focus from your end on food plots and just habitat improvement in general. But we touch on mock scrapes. I mean, is your strategy when you start to approach hunting season? I know obviously you're using cameras as well, but I mean, are you hunting timber? Are you in those mock scrapes? Are you hunting food sources? Is it an evolution from where you start early in the season to as the rut starts to progress closer? I guess just what are some of your thoughts around that?
We have some small little hunting plots that are pretty attractive, but really, we're hunting funnels and movements in the woods is my favorite over mock scrapes. And the mock scrapes, at every stand location, we have a mock scrape and a potential for a camera. So we're always looking at, okay, if it stands here, where are we putting the mock scrape? And if we're putting a mock scrape there, where are we putting a camera? So we make sure we have all those ingredients there at each stand location. Then really letting us tell the cameras and the sign, the rubs, the scrapes, tell us where to hunt. But I'm saving those morning stands. So a lot of my morning stands back in the timber that would be on the back side of a buck bedding area, between bedding areas, on a cruising bench or funnel. I'm waiting for that first cold front at the end of October.
It's pretty much what we're doing too.
Same. When we were talking about mock scrapes, and you also mentioned water holes, and I remember watching a lot of water hole videos on your channel. If you do, I keep going back to this guy that might have a 1/2 acre, 1 acre, like their kill plot. In terms of like food plot enhancements, what are you obviously putting a mock scrape on that field edge where, it's in 20, 30 yards of your bow stand. What else do you like doing in terms of maybe putting a water hole there, or like even hinge cutting and funneling those deer closer to that stand, or even, the whole plot screen? What are you in favor of?
One of the, I really like, so if they're coming into a small hunting plot, I like using a mock scrape at every stand location. And that's really important to me. But then I'm putting a water hole off of that plot so that it allows for a second stand location. So something I can get in and out of maybe in the morning where it's more, a buck cruising by at 11 o'clock on November 3rd, he might go to that water hole, but he might not step out on that food plot because it's a little bit higher risk level. It's more open.
Right.
And so now it establishes I get more of a morning, evening / water hole stand location where, and I'm separating out the attraction. So I'm not putting them in one spot. So then I'm creating those 2 stand locations for different timing.
And that water hole might be closer to like a known bedding area.
Yes.
If you're doing that. Yep. Okay.
So I like putting those water holes in between dry bedding areas, or between a dry bedding area and a food source. So they're eating natural browse and hardwood regeneration, shrub tips, briars, all day. And the first thing they like to do is almost take a drink on the way to their food. But now after they hit green all night, they don't need to take a drink of that water unless it's during the
right. And that kind of keeps the hunter from going in there too and bumping deer off of a food source in that early morning. So they're able to maybe hit the food source.
Yeah, it's 70, 80 yards away. And they're we have a lot of cruising water holes where they're between bedding areas too. But I look at it like I typically put out one mock scrape for every stand location, where water holes would be maybe a third of that. So if we had 11 stand locations and mock scrapes on a 50, 60 acre parcel, and all different kinds of winds and everything, we might have 2 to 3 water holes. And if we have really good elevation, we might get away with more like 3 to 4 water holes, because there's 400 feet in elevation. Typically you don't see a buck going all the way up, all the way back down for water. But if it's in that same cruising line, a quarter mile apart, then you can get away with 2. But even then, it's, we're talking 11 mock scrapes versus 3 or 4 water holes at the most on that same parcel.
Do you think that's good to know? I've got like that new 3 acre plot, and then I've got a really good, it's a mix of oak and cedar. And then it's actually a piece of the property that's sold, which is the bedding area. So instead of putting maybe that water hole in the food source, I'll put it between that food source, give me another stand location, and pulling deer from what used to be my property that I could have hunted.
And then what I do with that water hole too, because it's a stand location, I'm adding a mock scrape. So then trying to position the camera, it doesn't always work out that way, but I'm trying to position the camera. I get a picture or a video of both at the same time. And you'll find it's pretty cool. They'll hit that overall throughout the entire year. They'll hit that mock scrape probably 10 times to 1 over the water hole. Mm-hmm. And when they do hit the mock scrape, they're coming in and I'd say 95% of the year, they're not actually making a scrape. They're just rubbing their preorbital glands on the licking branch itself, and that they smell it. It's pretty crazy. And it's funny because they get very aggressive at times with it, and they'll break it in half. But typically we have those last for 5, 6. We had one last year. We put it in 2014. Last year in 2020 was the first year we replaced it. They last for a very long time.
And what are you talking about there, Jeff, on your vertical mock scrapes? Are you using like a native limb or something like that? Is it a rope, or what are you when you're doing your mock scrapes?
It's a grapevine, right?
Yeah, it's a grapevine. And I look at the ropes, ribbons, things like that are more of like a fad type thing.
Sure.
Where something natural that they would, so say for example, up north, bucks love to rub and scrape under jack pine.
Yep.
So you get a jack pine branch, 5, 6 feet long. If you're hanging it from a rope it's high up to a branch, I'd go with like a 7 or 8 foot piece of branch. But then grapevines hold a lot of scent, I believe, because they're more porous.
Mm-hmm.
They're also a little bit flexible, so they last a long time. But let's say they're scraping under white oaks and rubbing white oaks a lot. Well, then you use a white oak branch. And if you don't have vines in your area, but it's a 5 to 6 foot vertical vine, and when they come in, they're leaving their scent on it. And I'm just flipping through because I want to show you guys one of. So this is a buck I shot last year. And you could see he comes into the vertical vine. He leaves a scent on it. And it's pretty interesting because it's almost like he cares about that vine enough in that scrape that, see, when he moves his head and goes around, he knows the exact width of his antlers, and he's not going to touch that vine after he left his scent on it and smelled it. So he literally moves his antlers around that vine to not touch it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so that's one that's a different story altogether. I was sitting in that stand earlier that day, but the wind was iffy, actually coming from going towards where he came from. I shot him 2 days later. And if I would have stayed in that stand, I sat in about for 20 minutes, and the wind was just a little iffy, and it would have got worse as it went downhill towards evening. So I got out and moved to a different stand, and I would have spooked him, I'm sure. And I wouldn't have shot him, obviously, 2 days later.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting because we talk about that mock scrape in whether it's utilizing an existing whether it's a historical fall scrape and or a community scrape, or literally establishing something new. And I guess let's take the latter there, Jeff, in terms of establishing a new mock scrape by a new tree stand set. Are you using any type of preorbital scent or anything like that, or is it literally you're just positioning it as a visual in hopes of attracting.
And this is where I probably won't get a scent company sponsor ever. But,
he's going to tell us peeing in his scrapes.
So, well, I do pee in my scrapes, but just to start, just for a visual. But on top of that, though, I look at it that it's hard to argue. So it's hard to argue with a better scent than 20-25 deer leaving their scent on that licking branch and their preorbital gland scent, and then you spray some gel or dust or powder or whatever it is, and it just wipes it off. And so I look at it like immediately those scents start to accumulate, and so I'm visually, you're making the scrape, even though they're not scraping, but I establish mine. I start mine the end of June, early July, and that's when I put my cameras on them, because you can start to identify bucks and get an inventory. But I'm taking a garden rake, I'm making about a 3-foot really heavy, saucered out area on a flat spot, and then I'm putting that scrape right over the top. This is one we did back in 2016, I think, and it's on YouTube, fawns dancing and scrape. But this is pretty crazy. Imagine these fawns that aren't even 2 months old, and they're sniffing the end of this licking branch, the vertical. All the deer, there's already been probably 10 different bucks and does at the scrape, and the scrape's only is less than a week old at this point. They hit it immediately, and no scent or anything. But look at these fawns. Can you imagine what they're going through, smelling all those scents? They don't know how to process it. And they get
that's awesome.
Really excited, and they play around, and they keep going back. See the tail flickering?
Yeah.
They're so curious. And of course they're playing too, but I look at it like, man, they're, it kind of goes back to John Azoga told me, we go by a bread factory in Detroit, and it used to be Wonder Bread there. We'd smell the bread baking. They go by and smell the ingredients.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're, just like a beagle comes out and hits a rabbit track with no snow, and they know to turn right versus left. It's amazing. Their nose is what they can do. But so that's how I look at, like, with scents. I look at, like, I think that natural scent is by far the best scent.
I think most guys will agree with that. I would say probably most people are using it to try to establish it for the first time. So would you argue that the visual alone is enough to get that going, and there is no additional scent required? So,
and we don't do it all the time, but most of the time we do. I think raking out, imagine that earth smell, how strong that is.
Sure.
So you make a 3-foot, 4-foot diameter scrape with a rake, you kick it out, get rid of all the vegetation, and then we're literally peeing in it. And then we're putting it's crazy too. People use mock scrape scent, and they're actually dropping urine on the licking branch. Deer don't lift the leg up.
I've seen plenty of guys sitting there spraying like a Tink 69 on the licking branch. I'm like, no, that's not.
Are you peeing in it just to prove a point that it doesn't actually matter what smell is in there, or do you think that actually is doing some benefit?
I think it adds that ammonia type smell within, and really. And this is another Azoga thing, because I would literally go from Munising, drink a half gallon of water on the way to my house 25 minutes away. And then by that time I'd go out on the property and make a scrape, and I have bucks hitting the scrape on August 3rd after peeing in it. And I think it's just part of the calling card, where he told me that, really it boils down to any mammal, urine.
So
serious question then. Do you think deer can tell the difference between deer pee and human pee?
I don't think after at least a few minutes at the most.
Okay, because I'm peeing out of my tree stands quite a bit, and at first I was pretty nervous, and then after a while I was like, it doesn't seem to make a difference at all. So.
Well, it used to be that I couldn't carry a Gatorade bottle big enough. Like I would brim that thing at 7 a.m. and I'm like, now what?